U.S. President Trump says Iran and Israel are tired from recent fighting but warned clashes could resume. Many Palestinians in Gaza City refuse to evacuate northern areas despite Israeli orders. And NATO leaders agree to boost defense spending to 5% of the GDP by 2035. U.S. President Donald Trump has said Iran and Israel are tired after recent conflicts but warned future clashes are possible. He downplayed Iran's nuclear ambitions, saying the country has been trying for 20 years. And I don't see what's happening again, though the U.S. remains prepared to act if needed. Trump noted Iran's oil advantage and said the U.S. could have taken control of the Iranian oil but chose not to, expressing hope that Iran will use the oil revenues to rebuild. Regarding diplomatic efforts, Trump said talks with Iran are planned for next week, and while he is not strongly attached to an agreement, any deal would demand Iran abandon nuclear weapons, which he claims the U.S. has already destroyed.
It won't be me, it'll be somebody else, but we're there, we'll have to do something about it.
And Iran's Red Crescent has released footage claiming to show damage from the Israeli airstrikes as both countries begin observing a U.S.-brokered ceasefire. The video, which could not be independently verified, follows 12 days of Israeli attacks that killed hundreds, including top Iranian military and nuclear figures. Iran responded with mass missile launches that breached the Israeli defenses. Tehran says 610 people were killed and nearly 5,000 wounded, while Israel reported 28 deaths. The ceasefire was announced by the U.S. President Donald Trump. And for more analysis, we now move to Hani Saif in our newsroom. Hello, Hani.
Hello, Salma. Ladies and gentlemen, to help us understand the situation more, we're joined from Cairo by the Al Ahram managing editor, Mr. Mohammed Izzuddin. Mr. Izzuddin, welcome to Q News. Sir, how sustainable is the current ceasefire between Iran and Israel, considering the high casualty rates and the deep-seated mutual distrust?
Thanks for having me in Q News. Absolutely, what happened upon the approvals of two sides on truce and the ceasefire, that was because of the military exhaustion and the major casualties, despite that might believe you that Iran's casualties is far more than Israel, but Israel has already lost great casualties, despite that they never used to the longest-standing war. Fighting a state for 12 consecutive 12 days is a great exhaustion and attrition of the stockpiles of ballistic missiles of Iran, in addition to the highly costly, in addition to the, do not wish to say to the unpreparedness to intercept the missiles either of the Iron Item or R2 and 3. So therefore, the Israeli air defense system is costing from 300 million to 700 million casualties with respect to munitions, in addition to the economic loss. Certainly, it seems that the losses are greater for the Iran side, particularly demolishing the nuclear facilities. In addition, or specifically, the top of the U.S. administration, President Donald Trump, does not wish to lose a war, and even if he is biased to his preferred alliance, which is Israel in the Middle East.
Well, so how reliable are the assertions that the Israeli airstrikes have delayed Iran's nuclear program by several years? What would be the consequences if this assessment proves otherwise?
Certainly. Reports from the intelligence apparatus or the information centers view is that the strikes wasn't very decisive with Iran. So Iran has an opportunity of a highly enrichment of uranium. So within a small period of time will produce nuclear weapons, despite that the other side stated that there are great damages of the nuclear facilities. So there are two opinions with this matter. Firstly, that the strikes weren't that accurate in order to destroy or to fully destroy the nuclear facilities, and hence Iran will have another opportunity within a few months to go back to reproduce the nuclear tactic weapons. This what is the European countries very much concerned, despite that Iran is saying never attempts to produce nuclear power. In addition, that IAEA that was accused by Iran for espionage for Israel side, and there is also some report of NATO attacked the nuclear program, and its impact will be very gravely, as there are some introductions for producing the nuclear weapons that will be having a great dilemma if these weapons were used, despite that this 9 nuclear states, on top of which the US put the imbalance of the nuclear balance in the region would prompt the people to acquire nuclear weapons, and of course Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on top of the Gulf areas.
Well, Mr. Izzeddin, if we're speaking of the IAEA, then what effect could Iran's halt in cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency have on the global non-proliferation initiatives and the stability of the region?
Truly, Iran took such a position by saying that Iranian House said that the IAEA is very much biased to US and Israel and do not give great concern or attention to Israel as it is non-signatory of the NPT. Despite the regaining the trust or the postures, at least before the Iranian people, the international community, following the greatest strikes attacked to the nuclear facility. Officials never been informed up till now, but its impact will be very negative on the status of nuclear environment in the region, which means that Iran is not abiding to any condition to the NPT, so it has a right to produce a nuclear weapon, citing that Israel that isn't a signatory of the NPT, so therefore it doesn't abide to provide any information for its nuclear program, which is a very unfortunate that would lead to more escalation and tensions in the Middle East region, along with the Gulf, and certainly will be having a great impact politically, economically, not only upon the countries of the region, but the whole world.
One more question, Mr. Izzuddin. In what ways might China's position on Iranian oil influence diplomatic relations among the US, China, and Iran in the aftermath of the ceasefire?
Introductions of escalation are looming. The ceasefire agreement would collapse in any time, as Israel isn't abide of any agreement, and it's the same for Iran. But the matter would relate to resuming the war in a manner of attrition. Certainly, what we've witnessed throughout the past 2 days, the American strikes and its retaliation against allied U.S. militarily base. Orally, there is nothing written is in place, so all the options are in place, and of course it would be having a great impact on the oil prices and igniting economic problems, in addition to the state of attention and the race of acquiring weapons and spending more on it.
From Cairo, that was Mr. Mohammed Izzuddin, the Al Ahram managing editor. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, now we go back to Salma Al-Fi in our studio. Salma, over to you.
Hani, thank you very much. The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has condemned any actions that undermine the sovereignty of the nations, particularly among Arab and Islamic states. During a phone call with the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, President al-Sisi welcomed the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran, emphasizing the need for commitment to it amid regional tensions. Sisi also rejected the recent Iranian missile attack on Qatar and highlighted Egypt's diplomatic efforts to restore stability. Both leaders agreed on the importance of comprehensive political solutions and resuming nuclear negotiations between Washington and Tehran. The IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, says his top priority is redeploying inspectors to Iran's nuclear sites after the US and Israeli strikes. Speaking in Austria, Grossi stressed the need to verify Iran's enriched uranium stocks, including material near weapons-grade purity. Iran told the agency it was taking special measures to protect its nuclear assets, but gave no details. Grossi suggested much of the material likely survived the June 13th Israeli attacks and warned of the urgent need for full access.
Imagine that this material is there.
And flights resumed at the Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport as the Israelis reopened its airspace following a ceasefire with Iran. The Israeli military lifted nationwide restrictions Tuesday evening after nearly 2 weeks of aerial exchanges with Iran. The airport's authority confirmed Ben Gurion has reopened and is coordinating with carriers to restore flight capacity. The El Al airline is launching an airlift operation to return thousands of stranded Israelis abroad since the war began on June the 13th. U.S. President Donald Trump says Iranian nuclear sites were severely damaged, though intelligence on the impact remains inconclusive. And speaking alongside Secretaries Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, Trump disputed reports that the strikes only delayed Iran's nuclear program by a few months. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency had issued that assessment earlier this week. Both Rubio and Hegseth echoed Trump's skepticism, raising questions about the reliability of the intelligence.
And the amount of munitions, 6 per location. Any assessment that tells you it was something otherwise is speculating with other motives. And we know that because when you actually look at the report, by the way, it was a top secret report, it was preliminary, it was low confidence. All right, so this is you make assessments based on what you know. They don't.
And in Gaza City, many Palestinians are refusing to evacuate northern neighborhoods despite new Israeli occupation military orders to move south. Leaflets dropped by the Israeli occupation forces warned of impending strikes on Hamas-held areas in northern Gaza. Families who have been displaced multiple times insist on staying, but put despite the risks. The Israeli occupation military reported its deadliest day in southern Gaza, with 7 soldiers killed on Tuesday, raising pressure on the Prime Minister Netanyahu to seek a ceasefire. And Palestinians in Gaza held funerals for those killed in recent Israeli attacks, including aid seekers shot while trying to access food. Gaza's health ministry says Israeli forces opened fire multiple times at crowded aid distribution points, killing and injuring dozens. Humanitarian groups say the aid system forces civilians into combat zones. Israel claims it fired to control threats, but rights groups call the shootings unprovoked. Hamas accuses Israel of weaponizing hunger, charges Israel denies, blaming Hamas for diverting aid. And in Gaza, funerals were for Palestinians killed by Israeli fire as they attempted to collect humanitarian aid the previous night. And according to Gaza's health ministry, the victims were among hundreds shot or shelled near distribution sites since late May. A UN human rights spokesperson said over 410 civilians have been killed while trying to access food from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Israel claimed those killed were near military operations in the central Netzarim corridor, but said it was still reviewing the reports. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation told Reuters it had no knowledge of any incident near its designated aid point, which lies several kilometers from the area. Many Palestinians continue to risk their lives approaching UN trucks and Israeli-controlled aid routes. French President Emmanuel Macron has said that bringing an end to the Russia-Ukraine war remains a key goal, but is more difficult than we imagine. Speaking at the NATO summit in The Hague, Macron reaffirmed Europe's commitment to increasing defense spending in response to what he called the ongoing third Russian war in Europe. He emphasized that the war in Ukraine, following Russia's actions in Georgia and Crimea, underscores the need for European nations to take greater responsibility for their own security within NATO. Macron also reiterated his call for unity among the NATO allies, urging an end to internal trade tensions that could undermine collective defense efforts. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has stressed the need for a firm NATO stance against Russia, while acknowledging that Russia is He called on the United States, led by President Donald Trump, to take a more active role in enforcing and intensifying sanctions on Moscow. The Chancellor emphasized the importance of economic and diplomatic pressure alongside military preparedness, highlighting that only a united transatlantic effort can push Russia towards peace negotiations and de-escalation in the ongoing conflict. And Russia has launched a new wave of strikes across Ukraine, killing 17 people in the city of Dnipro and wounding more than 200. And dozens of buildings and infrastructure facilities were damaged in the southeastern city as missiles rained down overnight. In a separate incident, 2 civilians were killed in a Russian attack on Samara as Moscow continues its broad assault on urban centers. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has appointed Hennady Shapovalov as the new commander of Ukraine's ground forces. He will also be tasked with overseeing military recruitment abroad, part of a broader mobilization drive. Russia claims its air defenses intercepted dozens of Ukrainian drones overnight, including in the broader region of Voronezh. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has condemned a Russian missile strike on the city of Dnipro that left 16 dead and more than 100 injured, including train passengers and children. Addressing the Dutch parliament in The Hague, Zelensky accused Russia of carrying out the attack with the Iranian-designed Shahed drones. He said Moscow has used nearly 29,000 such drones since the war began, warning that Ukraine's ability to intercept them depends on sustained Western support. Zelensky also blamed Iran for enabling Russia's drone operations, describing Tehran's support as a key factor in the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, the U.S. President Donald Trump, en route to a NATO summit in the Netherlands, shared a message from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, though no official comment has yet been made on the Dnipro strike.
Even a passenger train was hit as it was simply following its route. The missile.
NATO's leaders have endorsed a significant increase in defense spending, reaffirming their commitment to collective defense as enshrined in Article 5. And in a statement, allies pledged to invest 5% of their gross domestic product annually in core defense requirements and defense and security-related spending by 2023. This includes allocating at least 3.5% of the GDP to resource core defense requirements, with up to 1.5% of the GDP annually dedicated to protecting critical infrastructure, ensuring resilience and strengthening their defense industrial base.
To make our people safer through a stronger, fairer and more lethal.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has stated Spain will meet NATO's new capability targets, but insists the country's current defense spending of 2% of the GDP is sufficient and realistic. Sanchez declined NATO's demand to raise defense budgets to 5% of the GDP, a stance that NATO chief Mark Rutte publicly opposed. In response to the U.S. President Donald Trump's criticism of Spain's defense spending, Sanchez emphasized respect for the sovereignty of the countries that choose to spend more, while reaffirming Spain's commitment to NATO and defending its current position.
La posición que ha tenido siempre España y me parece que es de pura lógica, de puro sentido común.
And tensions flared in Kenya as protesters marked 1 year since the deadly anti-government demonstrations, with police firing tear gas and shots heard off-screen. Demonstrators erected barricades and carried heart and cross-shaped banners alongside Kenyan flags. The unrest follows renewed outrage over the police brutality after the death of a 31-year-old blogger, Albert Ojwang, in custody. At least 10 people with gunshot wounds were hospitalized. Kenya's communication authority has repeatedly ordered a halt to live protest coverage by the local broadcasters. And tens of thousands have been displaced in southern China after heavy rains triggered massive flooding in Guangzhou province. State media say the Dulo River overflowed, flooding several counties and forcing over 80,000 people to evacuate. The CCTV footage showed floodwaters sweeping through buildings, including a mall in Rozhiang. A level 1 flood emergency was declared on Tuesday. In neighboring Guangxi, rescue teams used boats to reach stranded residents as the crisis escalates. And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here's what we have been covering. U.S. President Trump says Iran and Israel are tired from recent fighting, but warned clashes could resume. And many Palestinians in Gaza City refuse to evacuate northern areas despite Israeli orders. And NATO leaders agreed to boost defense spending to 5% of the GDP by 2035. And this concludes our news bulletin for the hour. And don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EG to stay informed. And thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.